Okay, so what are your thoughts? You mentioned LLC. We talked about S-Corp briefly. You alluded to that. QSBS, C-Corp. Uh, I see a big debate on the S-Corp. So, are you, do you, I know it obviously it depends, but generally speaking, if you're going to sell your business, is S-Corp a path you should go, you shouldn't go? Does it really matter that much? Is it overhyped? Because I see people saying, oh, S-Corp, and then people say S-Corp's the worst. So, do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah. I mean, look, S corps, they can be highly technical, there's only certain types of shareholders that qualify. It's either an individual or certain types of trusts. So if you want to invest through an LLC or you have, sort of institutional investors coming into your deal, an S corp just won't work. Generally, they're not going to want to come in as individuals. All distributions have to be pro rata. You can't have different classes of shares. So, you can't have preferred stock or any economics. There's a lot of reasons why an S corp is not ideal for sort of a deal where you have investors or it's anyone beyond you kind of starting a small business, or maybe you and your wife, or a small family business. um, and also, like, because of the technicalities of an S corp, it's not easy, but like it's not uncommon to like blow the S election. Like, just say you made disproportionate distributions 11 years ago. Well, technically, as of that point 11 years ago, you blew the S election and now you're a C corp, right? Very different tax consequences. And so, I think the idea is if you blow an S, like, it's a pretty drastic consequence to then be a C corp, right? You can't, I mean, maybe some things can be fixed, but like, you're not like defaulting to an LLC that's also a flow through. You're going to, a tax situation you certainly didn't intend. But I think S corps, there are benefits, right? Where you can't, if you're an LLC, you can't pay yourself a salary as a W-2, right? You're getting a guaranteed payment. It's a different, you're paying both sides of the employment tax versus, especially if it's a more closely held business. An S corp, you can pay yourself W-2 wages. So again, it is, it depends, but they're not these inherently evil, you know, legal entities. There's situations where I would say an S corp makes a lot of sense. It just really does depend on the ownership structure, type of business, what, like what your exit opportunity looks like. And again, like, with an S corp, that really leads to a lot of F reorgs in deals.
Well, and you mentioned earlier, you said that sometimes owners are afraid or hesitant to pay for the advice because it's expensive. But I can just tell you, if you're doing S Corp, and I'm not a lawyer, so like I said earlier, you ain't calling me if you get sued. I can just tell you though, if you're doing an S Corp and you mess it up like you said, and then you try to go to sell, you're gonna wish you'd paid for that advice. So the TikTok, hey, everyone should do this, everything's this. I made the joke about the Wyoming LLC that was going on a few weeks ago. Like all that stuff is cool, but you really need to kind of stop and say, what's my case? What's best for me? And what do I qualify for? And owners have to realize that marketers know that humans want speed. We want it quick, easy. We'll pay a premium if it's fast, if it's fast. And so marketers in this world will say, oh, set up the QSBS or the S Corp or the Wyoming LLC, and then they'll charge you $30,000, $50,000, and you didn't buy anything that's of value. You just paid for some package, and it's going to cost you potentially millions of dollars in the end.
Right, right. No, for sure. And I'm not on TikTok, but I've heard these things, and these are all legal, S corp, Wyoming LLC or Delaware any LLC, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a legal entity,
Mm-hmm.
and there's reasons to pick one legal entity versus another legal entity. And I would say the considerations, the things to think through are always kind of like the same way to think about it. But how that applies to your business versus my business versus another business, I mean, that's in the art of the conversation and really
Mm-hmm.
exploring that with the client and helping them, then make a business decision on what the right path is for them. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I think it's you know, a path to potentially a lot of pain if you just are blanket taking the advice of someone on TikTok or Instagram or whatever,
Yeah,
I
wherever
mean,
it is.
again, they might be giving you an eighth of the story, and the eighth they tell you is true, but like how that applies to your particular situation, it doesn't make any sense in the world, right?
Right.
So you can't say everything's false, but like, I would say a lot of it is maybe, not all you need to think through either.
Right. And to be fair, if you hired that person, they might give you all the nuance that we're talking about here and that you would talk with a client. But if you don't hire them and you just follow the advice off of the YouTube video or the tweet or
Yeah.
whatever, that's where the problem comes in at. And if they're selling you a package and there's no actual advice, that's a super red flag because now all of a sudden you didn't
Well,
do anything.